Newton defines gravitational force F as large capital G times two masses, mass 1 and mass 2, divided by r squared, while Einstein's general relativity asserts that gravity is not a force. Although general relativity curved space-time reduces to universal gravitation, flat geometry, when space-time curvature decreases to zero. A second curious feature, various operational definitions of mass, M1 and M2 above, may give somewhat different values comparing weight measured by on a scale, 2, atomic number of an element, 3, neutron mass not exactly equal to the sum of proton and electron mass, and fourth, the universal gravitation inferred mass. This is a term I'm introducing here today. The Cavendish experiment aimed to weigh the Earth. Earth mass could then be inferred using Earth's radius and density. Next, we had double, twice removed inferred mass of other planets, the sun and beyond to galaxies based upon Earth's inferred mass and Newton's universal gravitation. On another front, another curious feature is compared to other measures like light speed c, elementary charge E, and Planck's constant H, capital G measurements have exhibited more variation in obtained values and confidence intervals. In the Wikipedia article on universal gravitation, there's sort of a nice figure which summarizes this history, showing the variation in attained values and confidence intervals by various investigators over time. Now, Newton's gravity law, is that an honest mistake or intentional hoax? Let gravity denote standard gravity, small g, the observation of acceleration of objects in meters per second squared toward other objects, such as the Earth. Point 2, note mass in kilograms is not explicitly present in the observation of gravity g, quantified, as I just said, as length versus time squared. 3, Galileo and others before him, and there were many from what I've been rereading, noted that this observed acceleration g was independent of object mass. We have the, so-called Leaning Tower of Pisa experiment, and others had apparently done this same sort of experiment previously, even to Galileo. Thus, at least 50 years before Newton's work, the lack of a relation between mass and gravity g was demonstrated and known by many. 5, possibly Newton was unaware of this no result between mass and gravity g. If so, this favors the honest mistake option. 6, Newton focused on force as mass times acceleration. That's his second law, as we know. So he was inclined to relate the observed acceleration, gravity g, to his idea of force by adding mass to the story. This favors the honest mistake option. Point 7, this honest mistake led to the law that we know of, stated here, of the force equals the gravitational constant times the product of two masses divided by the distance between them squared. 8, widespread acceptance of this mistaken law set the stage for Einstein and many others to be completely tricked or hoodwinked into producing general relativity theory, also contrary to known fact that the observed acceleration, gravity g, was independent of object mass. 9, an alternative is that Newton knew about the independence of gravity g and mass, which favors the intentional hoax option. 10, if Newton knew previous results showing mass gravity independence, then he would probably have been aware of the logical inconsistency of asserting one object's mass, say m1 above, has zero relation to force F, while the other object's mass, say m2 above, is related to the force? If so, this favors the intentional hoax option. 11. Remaining question, the motive for Newton's hoax. Perhaps to show how gullible the intellectuals of his time actually were. Possibly revenge. Back in those days, the same things were going on as we see today. For example, Newton was in a big dispute with Robert Hooke, Hooke, with regard to some of his work with light. So there could be a revenge motive involved here. That's very speculative, of course. Some consequences of the failure of Newton's universal gravitation law. Universal gravitation failure has had major adverse effects in cosmology. When universal gravitation failed to account for astronomical measurements, instead of recognition that universal gravity was wrong, astrophysicists postulated that the missing mass, according to universal gravity, was actually there, but we just can't see it or detect it, namely the theory of magic dark matter. Another point, universal gravity constant G may be compared to a carnival trick to deceive where the gullible public always loses their money. The con artist says that gravity G equals a big capital G times the mass divided by r squared. This deception may look reasonable since small g is inversely proportional to distance r squared. But behind the curtain of the carnival trickster, G does nothing more than remove mass from the equation and set correct dimensions. Many particle physicists accept universal gravity. On another front here, universal gravity failure weakens the scientific merit of defining each force by a type of particle interaction. Further consequences of the failure of Newton's universal gravitation law. So the GM term in small g equals big G, m divided by r squared, acts to remove mass from the game to conform to the known independence of mass and freefall gravity G. This mass removal is done with the kilograms raised to the minus one, in other words, 1 over kilograms term in G. That's where the sleight of hand takes place to fool everybody. Thus, the G times mass term needs to be replaced with some other value x, where G equals x divided by r squared is consistent with observations. X may be determined partly by the law of motion in binary mechanics. Why has universal gravity failure not been widely recognized? For one thing, ad hoc hypotheses like dark matter can effectively hide universal gravitation failure. One factor may be that object mass is correlated with gravity G mechanisms described by binary mechanics. For example, planet radius relates both to the planet's mass featured in universal gravitation, and secondly, the law of motion, or motion mechanism proposed by binary mechanics and documented by the Casimir effect, lunar laser ranging data, and GRACE satellite data. So you are here today, the witnesses of the death of the universal gravitation law. This is something you'll tell your grandchildren, that you were there when this happened and you witnessed it firsthand. So be sure to put that in your diary.